The store, as usual, was crowded with people. Every morning, in search of fresh products, shoppers moved along the shelves, quickly deciding what they needed. In the corner, next to the shelf with yogurts, stood a 15-year-old girl. She was standing by the yogurt shelf, deeply absorbed in her selection. She was sorting through the packages, deciding which flavor to choose, when she heard footsteps behind her. Someone came too close. It was strange because there was enough space around, and no one was paying attention to her. She didn't immediately notice the person who had approached her. As for her, the whole world was focused on choosing a yogurt. However, her calmness did not go unnoticed. A guy with an unhappy expression on his face moved closer to her. His presence became palpable when he shoved himself into the space she was occupying, abruptly interrupting her focus. She turned around, and as soon as her eyes met his, he said with a frown, "Are you standing here like a post? Can't you see how many people are around?" The girl tried to explain that she was just choosing yogurt and that there was nothing special about it. But before she could say anything, the guy didn't give her a chance to respond. He stepped toward her, and at the moment she tried to step aside, he suddenly slammed into her with his shoulder, pushing her with such force that she almost lost her balance. The sight was quite rude, but no one intervened. No one noticed or chose to get involved. Everything happened so quickly that there was no time to think about the consequences. The girl, feeling her feet losing their footing from the shove, tried to stabilize herself and stand upright. But when she turned to offer the guy an apology for the accidental collision, a sharp blow struck her face. It was unexpected and painful, like being hit with a club. It was so sudden that she didn't immediately realize what had happened. The guy, looking at her with disdain, added, "That's better. Don't get in my way." Her face instantly turned red from pain and embarrassment. She felt her cheeks starting to throb. An overwhelming sense of helplessness ignited within her, and her eyes filled with tears. But she held herself back. She couldn't allow herself to break, even though her pride had been shattered at that moment. The guy, expecting a reaction, laughed. His friends, standing nearby, joined in the laughter. The girl felt a wave of shame swelling in her chest, but she couldn't even move. Looking around, she only saw the indifference of the other shoppers. No one came to help. Everything felt like it was happening in a fog, and she, gritting her teeth, remained standing in place, trying to hold back the tears. Her shoulders trembled with tension. Her heart was beating faster than usual. Too many people around, too many eyes, but no one dared to intervene. But then, suddenly, a hand rested on her shoulder. The person who was nearby made no sound, but the strength of his presence was felt from the first moments. She didn't know what had happened, but the hand on her shoulder instantly brought her back to reality. She didn't need anything else to understand. The one who would change everything had arrived. He turned to the guy who was still laughing, his friends still not understanding what was happening. This man was like a mountain, immovable and strong. He didn't say a word, but his gaze was so sharp that the bully immediately sensed something was wrong. It was clear that this man didn't fear the consequences, and the strength in his eyes made the bully feel vulnerable. The store absorbed the sounds as Jason Statham stepped onto the scene. His footsteps were confident, and he didn't immediately approach, giving the bully a chance to realize that his behavior wouldn't go unpunished. The bully, hearing the approaching steps, turned around with a hint of surprise. He met the eyes of the man standing right in front of him and realized that this wasn't just some random person. This was someone he couldn't joke with. Statham stopped 2 steps away from him and braced his hands on his hips, not moving. He watched the bully carefully, who still stood his ground, but now wasn't as sure of himself. The bully's laughter died down. The atmosphere in the store seemed to freeze. "You think you can treat people like that?" Jason spoke, his voice quiet but firm, like a metal clamp. The bully, seeing not just a threat in Statham's eyes, but real power, didn't back down. On the contrary, his aggression only grew. He smiled, though he already felt the tension in the air thickening. "Who the hell are you to tell me what to do?" he challenged. "Didn't like that I slapped her. Don't interfere if you don't want problems." "What? You don't like the way I talk to her?" Statham continued to stare at the guy, his expression unchanged. He didn't immediately answer, allowing the bully to understand that his words weren't getting through. Statham didn't need threats. He knew he was strong enough to put this guy in his place. The bully felt his confidence slipping away, but instead of stopping, he decided to push back. "You think I'm scared?" He stepped forward, leaning toward Statham, roughly shoving him with his chest. "You're nobody, and I'll do whatever I want with you." There were no signs of fear in his eyes. He felt his friends, standing nearby, starting to shift nervously, but that only gave him courage. Deep inside, he was sure that this man in front of him wouldn't dare to fight. He was confident of his victory. Statham didn't take a single step back. He felt the tension in the air intensify, and now, finally, he spoke, his voice like a hammer strike on concrete. "You think strength is just pushing people around and mocking them? No, that's not strength. You're weak. You can't even admit your mistakes because your pride is stopping you from being a human." The guy, not backing down, took another step forward, but there was now something uncertain in his movements. He tried to maintain his composure, but fear had already appeared in his eyes. He felt his own aggression collide with something that could not be broken by force. "Do you really think you can tell me what to do? You have no idea how tired I am of all this. I'll keep treating her however I want, and there's nothing you can do about it." Statham, without hesitation, lunged at him and grabbed him by the shoulder, lifting him slightly off the ground. "I'll do whatever is necessary with this," Jason said calmly, his voice still firm. "You insulted her, and now you'll pay for it." The guy, trying to break free, growled, but his eyes no longer held the same defiance. All he could do now was fight. He felt that the strength with which Statham held him left him unable to move. At that moment, he realized he had no chance. Statham, making no unnecessary movements, spoke even more calmly, but every word made the bully feel as if he was running out of air. "You're trying to act tough, huh? You don't understand that real strength isn't about hurting others. It's about being able to apologize and take responsibility for your actions." The bully couldn't stand the pressure anymore. He felt his lips start to tremble, but his pride still wouldn't let him take a step back. His eyes burned with anger. He wasn't ready to admit his guilt in front of all these people. He opened his mouth to say something, but at that moment, Jason made him feel his power. He shoved him aside, and the bully nearly fell. "And don't you dare approach her again. You have no right to decide for others," Jason said. His face remained calm, but determination was felt in every word. The bully, gritting his teeth, realized he wasn't going to win this situation. He stood there, shaking with anger and shame, but he couldn't do anything. His friends, not knowing how to react, stayed silent and looked down at the floor. The girl had been standing off to the side in shock, but she couldn't help but notice how the atmosphere was changing. The bully, who had just been attacking her with his eyes and words, now seemed to have given up. He couldn't retreat, but he couldn't continue fighting either. Statham turned back to the girl, slowly nodding, as if assuring her that she was safe now. He looked at the bully and added, "If you touch her again, I won't hold back." The bully, standing before the girl, froze. He felt his confidence waver, but instead of stepping back, his aggression only grew. He glanced at his friends, their gazes indicating that they were waiting for him to act. A fire of anger burned inside him, not letting him calm down. He was on the edge, and his gaze became even more hostile. He took a step forward and swung his arm, aiming for the girl. Statham was nearby, but at that moment he realized the bully wouldn't stop. "You still want to try?" Statham spoke, stepping to the side to be in the path of the punch, ready to protect her. But the bully, seeing no other way out, lunged at the girl with his raised hand, preparing to strike her across the face, ignoring Statham's warning. Then, like thunder on a clear day, Statham instantly grabbed his wrist, not allowing him to complete the swing. His grip was ironclad, and the bully felt his hand squeezed in a cold grip. "You thought this would be so easy, huh?" Jason said, his gaze firm and cold. "You were wrong. You can't just threaten people like that." The bully didn't even have time to move before Statham threw him aside with such force that he barely managed to keep his balance. But instead of stopping, he gathered his courage and stood up, ready to continue. However, his friends, noticing that the situation was getting out of hand, weren't planning to stay out of it. One of them, who had been standing behind, clenched his fists and looked at the others, waiting for the signal. They couldn't let this moment slip away. They immediately realized that if they didn't intervene, their friend would be utterly humiliated. Without warning, they simultaneously stepped towards Statham, trying to attack from both sides. One of the bullies, clenching his fist, approached Jason with a furious expression on his face, aiming to punch him in the stomach. The second, who was a little closer, tried to strike from the side, targeting Statham's shoulder, hoping to catch him off guard. But Statham was ready. He reacted instantly. First, he used his left hand to intercept the blow from the first bully. Then, with a quick motion of his right hand, he shoved the second one aside, causing him to lose his balance and crash into a shelf, knocking products to the floor with a loud crash. The first bully, who had punched Jason, bounced off his body like it was a stone wall. He tried to attack again, but Statham was already in front of him, skillfully sidestepping his arm and easily blocking the next punch. "Enough, guys," Jason said, his voice calm but firm like a command. "This is not what you want to mess with." But the bullies didn't give up. They kept attacking, and now the situation was becoming dangerous for Statham. Their aggression only grew. In response to another attack, Jason used a move that knocked them off their feet, sending one of the bullies crashing to the floor, with his head hitting the ground. Despite Statham's lightning-fast movements, the bullies didn't stop. They were young and full of energy, and though they realized they couldn't match Jason, their pride and determination not to retreat kept them going. One of the bullies grabbed the nearest bottle of drink and, despite his previous failed attempts to attack Statham, swung it at his head. But Jason, remaining calm and confident, was faster once again. He grabbed the bully's arm with the bottle, pressed it against himself, then swiftly yanked it from his grasp, tossing it aside. Statham was so quick and precise that the bully didn't even have time to process what had happened. The bottle crashed into the far corner of the store. Then Jason took a step aside and, seizing the moment, quickly cut off the path of one of the remaining bullies. He grabbed him by the neck and slammed him against the wall, making him feel completely powerless. The others stood frozen, unsure of how to react. Their desire to continue attacking gradually turned into the realization that they wouldn't be able to win. Now the situation was clear. Statham wasn't planning on killing anyone, but he had certainly shown the bullies that they would not win this confrontation. "If you don't stop now, I'll make sure your lives change forever," Jason said firmly and decisively, his gaze leaving no chance for the bullies to retreat. The girl stood off to the side, her eyes wide open in shock. She felt safe, yet remained tense. She couldn't believe that her life had changed so much in just one encounter. Meanwhile, one of the bullies, realizing that their attack was pointless, took a step back and glanced at his friends. He signaled to the others that they wouldn't be able to win. "We're leaving," he said, and they began to retreat slowly. But Statham, still standing his ground, didn't take his eyes off them. His words hung in the air like a threat. "I'll be waiting for you," he said quietly. "If you come back here, be ready for the consequences." When the bullies finally disappeared through the store doors, the atmosphere inside lightened noticeably. But Statham wasn't ready to relax. He still stood at the spot where the intense conflict had just unfolded, his gaze unwavering. He watched every movement, ready for any new developments. The girl standing nearby nervously gripped the yogurt package in her hands, trying to process what had just happened. She had just endured an attack, but now, thanks to Statham, she felt safe. Yet, despite that, the inner tension didn't leave her. "Thank you," she said softly, though her voice was unsure. "I didn't know what to do. I didn't expect something like this." Statham nodded without looking away from what was happening in the store. He knew they might come back. The aggression of those guys wouldn't vanish so quickly. Deep down, he understood that he had likely just become their target. "This isn't over," he said, turning to her. "They won't forget this so easily. You have to be ready if they decide to return." She looked at him, her eyes still filled with confusion and anxiety. She was grateful for his help, but she also felt that, in that moment, her life had changed radically. "What should I do now?" she asked, glancing around a little awkwardly, as if she couldn't quite believe she had just experienced such a scene. Statham paused for a moment. He knew that her life might never feel as safe as it once had. She had seen how cruel and unfair the world could be, and that was a tough lesson. "Just live your life as usual, but be more aware," he said. "Avoid places where guys like them might be, and be ready to defend yourself. But if they come back, know that you're not alone." He said this not because he wanted to be a hero, but because he understood how important it was not to leave people alone with their fears. Statham knew that in moments like these, it was vital to have someone standing behind you. Soon after they left, everything seemed normal again, but the sense of tension in the air didn't disappear. Statham stood still, his gaze focused, as if he could feel something was missing. He knew the bullies wouldn't leave without consequences. A few minutes later, the store door swung open once more, but this time there were 5 of them, and they weren't alone. First, the same bullies who had just tried to attack entered, but now they were with 2 others. Tough-looking guys who were clearly much more aggressive. Their faces were twisted with malice, and their bodies were tense, ready for action. This was no longer the same conflict. This was a real threat. But that wasn't their main advantage. One of the guys was badly beaten, his face swollen, and his arms marked with bruises from the blows. This was the same bully who had just tried to attack with a bottle. He walked in, limping slightly, and his eyes were filled with vengeance. Behind him, he dragged several shelves of products he had knocked over when they were returning, creating chaos in the store. "We're not done, old man," said the one in the lead, stepping closer. His voice was sharp and filled with rage. "You thought you could let us go without consequences. We've come back with reinforcements, and this time, you won't stop us." He took a step towards Statham, and his friends, closing in, surrounded him. Statham didn't move, but his eyes became more alert. The girl, watching the scene unfold, felt her anxiety rise once again. She didn't know what would happen next, but she felt that the danger was now much more real. The bullies didn't hide their anger. They were ready to act, and their eyes were gleaming with rage. One of them, the one who had just knocked over the shelves of products, stood in the corner, ominously watching Statham. He held several packages of goods in his hands, ready to use them as weapons. "You think we're playing with you?" one of the new arrivals sneered, clutching a box of products in his hands, ready to throw it at Statham. "You won't stop us, even if we knock everyone down." Statham felt the pressure in the air rise. The bullies had decided to act in coordination, understanding that they couldn't handle this one by one. But Jason wasn't a newcomer to situations like this. He knew that only by calmly controlling the situation could victory be seized. "You think your numbers make a difference?" Statham said, not moving from his spot, but his voice was clear and confident. "All you're doing now is making me act faster, and you won't like it." The first bully, who had swung the box, yelled and threw it towards Statham, but he was faster. He dodged, and the box missed, hitting one of the other bullies. Statham seized the moment, grabbing the first bully's arm, who, to his horror, realized he couldn't escape Statham's grip. Without giving him time for a second strike, Statham sharply pulled him toward himself and neutralized him with one swift movement. The bully landed on the floor with a dull thud, but that was just the beginning. Two more bullies decided to attack simultaneously, hoping their combined effort would knock Statham down. One of them tried to strike him from behind, but Jason, sensing the movement, quickly spun around, grabbed his arm, and using his strength, threw him aside. He crashed into a fruit stand with a loud crash, causing apples and pears to scatter across the store. Now there were only 3 bullies left, and Statham could feel their confidence crumbling with every move. They began to realize that all their efforts were in vain. One of them, clearly the most determined, lunged at Statham with his fists. But Jason, already predicting his moves, seized his wrist and shoved him so hard that the bully fell to the ground. "If you want to keep going, let's do it," Statham said, no longer trying to hide his irritation. "But I'll say it again, no one's leaving here without consequences. You started this fight, and I'm going to finish it." The bullies struggled to get to their feet, realizing that everything they had done would not lead to victory. They began exchanging glances, their faces expressing not only anger, but also confusion. This was the moment when they realized that Statham was not just strong. He was also not going to let them leave without consequences. It was too late to retreat. They had no choice but to either surrender or continue, knowing the consequences would be much more severe. "I told you that if you keep going, we won't finish here," Jason repeated, already preparing for the next step. They stood, looking at each other, beginning to understand that their aggression would be punished. Statham was ready not only to continue the fight, but to take it to a new level, showing them that underestimating someone who deals with such threats was a mistake. Statham stood in front of the bullies, his calmness unwavering, even though there were more of them and their actions were becoming more desperate. The bullies, feeling cornered, tried to regroup, but their confidence faded with each new move Statham made. He was like a rock, unyielding despite their rage. "Do you get it, old man?" one of them yelled, clenching his fist, but his voice sounded less certain now. "We're not leaving, you won't beat us." However, his words sounded increasingly hopeless. Statham stepped forward, closing the gap, and stopped him halfway, not allowing him to continue with his threats. "I already told you I don't want to fight," Jason said with a soft but firm tone. "But you decided you needed to test me. This won't help you." At the moment when one of the bullies tried to attack again, his friend, standing nearby, grabbed him by the shoulder and stopped him. "Wait, enough," he said, his voice almost faint with confusion. "We're not going to win. We've already lost. Let's just apologize and leave." The bullies froze, realizing their plans had failed. Statham didn't move, only watching their reaction. He could see that what mattered now wasn't the physical outcome, but how they would perceive their actions. Giving in to this silent pressure, the bully leading the attack lowered his gaze. His confidence was shattered, and he seemed unsure of what to do. He turned to the girl, then back to Statham, and finally said, We're sorry. For everything. For what we did. We had no right to treat you like that," he said, swallowing hard. "We were idiots." The other bullies, hearing his words, also began to realize that this shouldn't end here. One of them approached the girl and quietly said, "Sorry for dragging you into this. We were wrong." The rest of the bullies, seeing their friend take a step toward reconciliation, nodded. Statham didn't say a word, only silently observing what was happening. He could see that they had acknowledged their mistake. At that moment, the scene reminded him that in the world, it's not always about fighting to the end. Sometimes, showing strength of spirit and respect is enough. Statham looked at the girl, and her gaze softened a little. He knew she was still processing what had happened, but now, thanks to the bully's apologies, she could feel safe again. He turned to the bullies. Your apologies are accepted, but remember this. Respect isn't given with a snap of your fingers. It's earned. You can still make up for your mistake. Just don't repeat it, Jason said, his voice calm and composed. But there was still one important detail. Jason knew that for the bullies, this moment couldn't just pass unnoticed. They had to do something to atone for their actions. The girl, having recovered a little from the ordeal, noticed the destruction the bullies had left in the store. Upset shelves, broken bottles, scattered products. The store looked like a battlefield. She looked at Statham, realizing that after everything that had happened, they needed to restore some normalcy. "We need to clean this up," she said, her voice no longer filled with fear, but with determination. Statham nodded, but instead of offering to help, he turned to the bullies. "So you said you were sorry, but now you'll have to prove it in action," he said. "If you really want to make amends, you need to help restore this store. All these shelves, the products you broke. Now it's your task to fix it." The bullies, despite their shame, realized that this was the only way to atone for their actions. They didn't argue and agreed. After a few awkward moments, they began gathering the scattered products, lifting overturned shelves and putting them back in place. Statham watched silently but with satisfaction. He knew this was an important step for them, a step that could change their perception of themselves and the world around them. Within a few minutes, the store began to return to its normal atmosphere. The bullies, although still working awkwardly, increasingly realized that their actions weren't just harmless mischief. They understood that every action has consequences and that apologies were only the first step. The girl, watching them work with relief, finally felt that her life was beginning to return to normal. She knew that the moments she had gone through wouldn't disappear, but now she was ready to move forward. Statham, seeing her gaze, smiled. "You're all right," he said without a doubt. "Everything will be fine." The girl smiled back. She didn't know what the future would bring, but now she knew one thing. She wasn't alone, and if she ever faced difficulties, she would be ready to overcome them.